and of the Son, of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please stand. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. O God, who by the light of the Holy Spirit did instruct the hearts of the faithful, grant that by the same Holy Spirit we may be truly wise and ever enjoy his consolations through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Our Lady, seat of wisdom, in the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, there was a lot of feedback. All right. Were you able to watch the first lecture? We passed it on. I think we passed it on Sunday or Saturday, so I hope you had time to watch it. If not, watch it again later. It was a bit of an introduction, a little bit unwieldy, but the moment we get into it, you begin to realize that as you assimilate all the information that we're giving you, and then you begin to understand what we're doing here. So the way you already know how I approach these sealing sessions, it's like a seminar. At the same time, I'm trying to get away from technical stuff. So some of you who might have knowledge in some of the things that I'm bringing up here might have a name for it, but I'm trying to get away from the technical stuff. We want healing. The effects of the trauma or the wounds or the unpleasant events that we have experienced in life, that's what we're trying to focus on. Not so much on the technical, educational background. If you want to do a master's in psychology, then fine. But here we want to be healed. So not to worry so much about all the other information that I don't bring up. Okay? Okay, just a little review of what we learned last time. We spoke about adaptation. Another word for it is splitting or fragmenting, right? There's so many ways of expressing it. So when a child or an adolescent is subjected to trauma or perceives trauma, he will adapt, split, dissociate for the sake of getting on with life. Remember, the self becomes fragmented. Okay, let's wait for about 2 minutes so everyone can get settled. Okay? That's okay. Okay, remember that when there's childhood unpleasant events, which everyone suffers, okay? If you're saying that you did not suffer any childhood event that did not harm you or hurt you, then this might be the wrong place for you. Okay, so everyone is here. We know, we agree with that. It could be slight, it could be severe. So when a child is subjected to these unpleasant events, breaches in the growing up years, and the child perceives trauma, then he or she will adapt because it's against the nature of perfect growth. Have you seen trees that sometimes are bent because there might be a big rock there or a house, then it tries to grow and avoid the obstacle. So the tree also adapts. Did you see this in nature all the time? There could be frogs that only have 3 legs, right? Because they adapt, okay? So we will always adapt, dissociate, or split for the sake of getting on with life. The self becomes fragmented, right? So that's our theory. In fact, it's reality, not just theory. So when the self becomes fragmented, there are, of course, different and varied parts, right? So there's a part of me that wants to kill you. There's a part of me that also wants to love you, right? So it exists in the person, we get fragmented. Every part has a role to play in responding to the trauma. So remember, I'm using trauma as a place for wounds, for unpleasant events. Trauma, just the Greek word for wound. Parts come out of adaptation or splitting. Parts could be opposed to each other, in fact. So we could have many parts, and some of these parts are at war with each other. Parts could oppress other parts depending on the need of the person. There is self-alienation that results. So going back to what we have established at the beginning, this is something to always think about, because otherwise we attack ourselves that I'm not a good person. Remember? Red badge of courage. Adaptation is a red badge of courage because we're trying to survive. Do you blame a kid for doing that? Maybe not. I always have this example about a 5-year-old boy, and a 5-year-old does not know sin, although he could do bad things, right? You've been a parent, but he does not know sin. He does not know right and wrong yet, so the mind is being formed. So if a mother or a father is very punitive, meaning punishing, then the boy might spill food or break a glass, right? And then if the parent is very punitive, that the moment they misbehave, then here comes the belt or a ruler, punishing. What do you think that boy will do? Right? So there's no way of exercising freedom. Then the boy might begin to manipulate. Oh, did you break the glass? No, I did not. Oh, he might start lying. You see? So it's a form of adaptation. But at that point, would you blame the boy? Okay, there's bad things that he did. He's lying now to mom. It's part of our concupiscence, right? But the thing about these children shouldn't be punished so much. So, right? I learned that a lot of children who are grounded, so, okay, you misbehave, you go to your room. Especially when you're adolescent, you're beginning to, not adolescent, but you're in your teens, 10, 11, 12. You go to your room and you begin to be isolated. And they have a cell phone in hand. What do you think they'll do? They're going to start to connect because they feel isolated. There's no one. I'm like grounded here. I cannot talk to anyone. And of course, children are so active, right? And if they're isolated, they begin to do bad things. So that's how they develop this pornography, right? Isolation is one of the reasons why kids as early as 9, boys as early as 9 get into pornography. Because they're now looking, okay, what's there so that I can connect with somebody. So pornography and all these sexual struggles is a multifaceted thing. So that's one aspect of it. That's what we discovered in studies, that isolation results in something. So it's not to say that we don't discipline our kids. So you see? Okay. So we have established this adaptation which fragments the self. That is, it is not a pathology. So what is a pathology? It's a disease, an illness. Adaptation is never a disease, but rather a red badge of courage, trying to survive. So also, the child is trying to make sense of what at times is a horrible event in life. The more severe the trauma, the more adaptation or splitting occurs. Did you notice that? The more severe the trauma, the more there's splitting. There's more adaptation. You remember, okay, I will use this example. John Vanier. You've heard of him, right? Okay, I'll say something later on. John Vanier is in one of his books, I think it's Growth and Community, he founded L'Arche, L apostrophe Arch, L'Arche, French name for a place to grow, a house. So the reason why he founded L'Arche, because one day he visited a place for people with mental illnesses, insane asylum they called before. and saw two men chained to a post. These two men were like dogs. To him, they were like dogs. They are chained to the post. And the reason why they chained to the post, because they have severe mental illness. They could, they could do harm to others. And they were chained to a post. And so he began to understand, being a man of God, he began to understand that the reason why these two men are really mentally ill, has severe mental illness, is because they now have split from reality. Because living the life, the real life, the reality is just so painful that they cannot adapt to it. Or, well, they cannot live it, they cannot tolerate it, so they would split from reality. Sometimes that's what mental illness is. So if you see somebody on the street like just saying things, right, voicing out things, and because they're adapting, there's now like on a realm of fantasy, because fantasy is not painful, but reality is so painful that they cannot tolerate the pain, so they split. It's a form of adaptation. So we think that the more adapted the person is, the more there's adaptation. That means there's more severe trauma, not because they're crazier. Oh, he's just crazy. When we begin to understand it, we don't, in fact, label people with mental illness as crazy. Okay, it's a way of speaking. But you begin to understand that, oh, they were adapting. And when we begin to see that in ourselves, because have you heard of, what's his name? Eckhart Tolle. Some of you who read a lot of books. So Eckhart Tolle is a healer, maybe not Christian, but he uses some Christian components. Did you know that some people, we just don't speak out, we just don't speak aloud what we think. But if you really verbally say what we're thinking and we're passing by him, he's like, oh, that person is crazy. Isn't it? Sometimes we ruminate about so many things in our heads. But we don't just say it to people, we think of it. If we're like really saying it verbally, some people might think that, oh, you're crazy. But because we have all these internal struggles that sometimes we don't know how to deal with. So internal struggles. Okay, so a split from reality, and this is if you have extreme illnesses are like that. When there's schizophrenia and other DID. This word DID, dissociative identity disorder. So we call it that way because they're now split from reality. Now, I want to say this because I brought up John Vanier. He was a very good man. When I was like reading about his books, then I said, "Oh, this is a person that will become a saint." But a few years ago, he was found out to have abused women. So now he's like taken away from his books, are probably banned from other places. But did you see that? Like in us, there's a lot of good, but because we're wounded, we can also do things that are not healed, do bad things. I mean, just look at some priests who are sometimes maybe are very good at their ministry, but they have an illness, right? So some of them have abused boys. Okay? So it's a grim reality. That's why healing is needed, right? Yes. You remember Aaron. And of course, those who have been sexually abused by priests are very wounded. So that's why there's a ministry that helps them. We want to help them so that they can heal. Okay, remember Aaron? So just to speak about some of these internal struggles that sometimes we cannot resolve right away. So Aaron describes, just for the sake of remembering, Aaron describes his relationship style. I start out by getting attached to women very quickly. I immediately think that this is the one for me. I'm all over them, cannot spend time enough with them until they start to get serious or there's a commitment. Then I suddenly start to see everything I didn't see before, everything that's wrong with them. I start feeling trapped with someone who's not right for me. I want to leave, but I feel guilty or afraid they'll leave me. I'm stuck. I cannot relax and be happy, but I cannot get out of it either. You see this all times, sometimes in a toxic relationship, that's what happens. A woman cannot get out of it. The woman that's battered, right? And then later on, she might get out of it, but then she finds another man, but the same. So sometimes we call this reenactment of the same thing. And the reason why, because the woman might have this kind of, she feels alive. That's the only thing she knows. That when she is like being, battered by a husband, but at least there's love. She is being recognized. There's somebody that she wants to attach to. And that's what makes her alive. Although, at the same time, she could tolerate, even if she's abused, physically, whatever, verbally, she tries to tolerate it because there's a lot of shame if she doesn't find somebody who will stay with her. You see? So it depends on all these conflicting parts that are going on in the person. Okay. So I promised that I would also give an example of a woman. So the woman's name is Nellie. So this is from the book I'm reading, the one by, okay, I brought it this time. So I'm reading a lot of books, but this one, Healing the Fragmented Selves of Trauma Survivors by Janina Fisher. So Nellie came to Janina Fisher for counseling, and she presented herself as depressed. But when asked to describe her symptoms, instead she recounted a series of beliefs about herself. I'm disorganized, lazy. I can't seem to get off the ground. I'm ashamed to think of myself as a competent person, though people tell me I am. Her first thought each morning was another day for me to make a waste of, and then she would feel overwhelmed and pull the covers over her head and sleep until early afternoon. Sometimes some of us, even myself, I could relate to a little bit of it. I don't want to think of myself as a competent person. I used to have a lot of self-doubt. How can I preach if I have this self-doubt? I used to get really nervous. And so I asked my spiritual director, am I really called to be a priest? And he said, oh, that's temporary. If you're nervous about preaching, the Lord will take that away or heal you. Yeah, so it's true. Okay, so she would sleep until early afternoon. Appointments were forgotten. Dishes didn't get washed. There was nothing to eat in the house, confirming her belief that she was a failure and generating a series of harsh judgments that drained her energy and generated the impulse to go back to bed. Now in her 50s, she could recall what it was like to be the underachieving child in an achievement-oriented family, hiding in plain sight to avoid angering her abusive, narcissistic father, who was threatened by his children's accomplishments and wounded by their failures. Her funny, charming personality had won him over, and seeing her as a bright, ditzy, disorganized kid was acceptable to him, meaning the father, at least marginally acceptable. She had promise, even if she didn't have achievements. So at the same time, you see what's going on in her. Later on, we'll see. I'll speak more about her later. Okay? So, what about us? What about you? So, I'm sure some of these things are like, you know, it's eliciting some sentiments, some emotions in us. We can relate to some of them. So, now here, do you see different parts in you? Some parts at war with others. Right? Just think about that, Give you 10 seconds, 20 seconds. There are parts in me that are at war with each other, with other parts. It could be a part that's looking for love and attachment, but tries to take distance when the relationship gets serious, right? So some of us might have that in our dating, when we were dating, but now it's been healed, right? So that's good. Some young people might have that. So avoidant style of attachment. So maybe later on we can speak about those 4 different types of attachments. It could be a part that wants to accomplish projects on time, but another part that opposes and says, you need to relax more. You're always working hard. I had that before. Another example, a part that wants to be recognized for the good that the person does, but is non-assertive and hates herself for making known her accomplishments. Right? So, for example, a person who does not like to be seen, or he or she wants to be seen, but at the same time doesn't want. This going back and forth. So being seen positively, some of us have that. For example, being given a compliment. Do you like being given compliments? Oh, you did very well. You know? So the Holy Spirit did that or something. So being seen positively, being given a compliment, praised for something, or evoking attention for one's accomplishments, successful performance, and achievement awards can all evoke the fear of visibility. So I don't want to be seen. And the expectation of being used or abused. So the moment I have all these gifts, they see me, they could use me or abuse me. We often forget that some kind of special attention or grooming often precedes sexual or even physical abuse, making traumatized clients hypervigilant, sensitive to being treated kindly as well as to being ill-treated. Right? So we could be hyper vigilant. Why is this person treating me so nice and kind? There must be something he or she wants from me. You see? So that kind of pattern of thinking is there when we have been abused. Another example, a part who is self-sacrificing. So we see this a lot in our Catholic churches. A part who is very self-sacrificing, who wants to please others, but hates himself or herself for not taking care of his or her own needs. Right? So the person now, because there's a lot of, anguish there. When a person is very, sometimes this martyr complex, I sacrifice for others, but then does not take care of himself or herself. And now the person resorts to addictive behaviors because there's anguish in not taking care of oneself, just giving, giving, giving. Okay, so it's kind of a review, but at the same time, more information that I'm giving to you. Remember, we need to see and understand ourselves in a compassionate way. So it's a red badge of courage. It's saying a no-fault healing model. It's not my fault, or there's no fault there when I adapted. The fault has to do with if I'm not healed because I'm doing bad things, right? When we are not healed, then we do all kinds of addictive behaviors, impulses, and all those things. I get into this impulsive eating, bulimic, or whatever. And the more we begin to feel shame, right? It's repetitive. And in fact, the more we get into the trauma affected parts of our life, so we're not using our thinking there. So I'll say that, I'll say more about that later. So what I'm introducing to you here is using parts language. Parts. So there's a part of me that does this, there's a part of me that does that, there's a part of me that I hate, there's a part of me that I'm angry at. Okay, so parts language. What we need to understand is those parts is not I or you. It's just a part of you. And what we sometimes do is that that's me. I am that. I am this, I am that. But to begin to understand that it's not me, because the me is actually good from a theological, anthropological understanding, right? What we do is bad, okay? So I'm bringing in our Christian understanding, because the moment we say we're bad, 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 we will never get to, in fact, you know, if we're always saying we're bad, 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 then that means I'm not lovable. God will not love me. That is the corollary to that. That's the result of that. And if we don't think that way, that God does not love me, then of course we won't be saved, because we don't understand His love. And we keep doing bad things because there's shame. The greatest form of shame is like, I am unlovable. Right? There's no one who will see me, understand me, and love me. So I am ashamed of who I am. So we need to develop this no fault or a red badge of courage kind of thinking about our parts. So in most healing models, no differentiation is made between the I that feels shame, or the I that explodes in anger, or the I that is always afraid. Okay? Its emotion is treated as an expression of the individual's whole self. I am afraid, I am angry, I am ashamed. You see? In a parts model, so now we're talking about parts, however, each distressing or uncomfortable thought, feeling, or body sensation is treated as a part. Okay, so I'm reading from Janina Fisher, just to give, I'm learning a lot from her. If you really read her book, which sometimes is technical, I'll say this. If you read The Body Keeps a Score by Bessel van der Kolk, Janina Fisher's book, given your prayerful Christian life, you will heal. You don't need a lot of other things, no? But it takes time, because when you're reading it, you're trying to learn a lot about yourself, okay? Those are books to be lived, not books to just be learned, okay? It needs to be applied. So, by deliberately and consistently using the language of parts rather than the language of I, right? We begin to observe its trauma-related feeling or reaction as a message from a part or parts, which I feels ashamed and apologetic, and which I is disgusted by all the apologizing. When we ask these questions, we evoke curiosity and facilitate mindful observing. So we'll speak about this word curiosity and mindful observing. But just put a placeholder there. There is now a very slight distance between the observer and what is being observed. Slight distance between the observer and what is being observed. The client or the person can still feel the feeling or reaction, but with a decrease in intensity, presumably due to increased activity in the medial prefrontal cortex. So I will define all this. And reduced amygdala activation. So first, what is the medial prefrontal cortex? So at the end of this 5-week session, you'll learn a lot of tech terminologies, but they're essential. So the limbic system is here. The limbic system is the one that takes flight, uh, fright, fight, flight, freeze, and other things that we added to it. So it's like an animal kind of brain, reptilian brain. So what it is like, I mean, if you scare a dog, the dog will run, flight. So we all have that because we're part of the animal kingdom, right? If you corner a dog or a fox or whatever, it will fight you, right? Or a deer could just freeze in the headlights, right? When there's danger. It activates all the bodily sensations, right? So we have that. But what happens is that we're human beings with reason. And so we have the prefrontal cortex, meaning this is where we think, this is what we use for reasoning, this is what we use for solving 2 plus 2 equals 4, that kind of thing. And the part that is the medial is activated when we meditate. So there's a study that they did a scan of brains, and the person and the most group the group of people that had the most healthy brain are the Buddhist monks. Imagine, not Catholics, but Buddhist monks, because they're always meditating, right? So some Catholics might have a very healthy brain because they're also meditating. You're doing adoration in front of the Blessed Sacrament 1 hour a day. A lot of priests have that because they're always thinking about meditating and also thinking about homilies and stuff like that. So the medial prefrontal cortex, when it's always activated, and it will be activated when we do these parts, this healing. And what happens is that it replaces the amygdala. The amygdala is all the impulses are there. Fear, emotions. We easily react. So reactive. Somebody said something that might be offensive and all we do is like react. And then like say something bad also to the other person. But if we're engaged in the medial prefrontal cortex, we probably won't react right away and just think and think what to say. And then we'll say, okay, I have to forgive this person, right? So that kind of thing. When that's activated always, then we know what to do. We don't react. Like, if I slap you, I'll slap you too. That's the amygdala. Like, that's the flight, fight, freeze response. But as human beings, we use our reason, right? So, medial prefrontal cortex, we become less reactive, but we respond rather than react. You see? Okay. So, the amygdala is about reaction, impulse, emotions, drama. Okay. There was a word here that said slight distance. There is now a very slight distance between the observer and what is being observed. So what is being observed are the parts. The parts that's, I'm so nervous now. I'm so anxious. I'm about to give us a talk. Okay? But what happens if like we're always using the I, I'm so nervous, I'm so anxious, I'm about to give a talk, I might freeze and no words come out of my mouth. So, but it's just a part of me that's anxious, that's nervous. But so I had to take a slight distance from it. And we'll explain this more. That is what we call unblending. So the I, the self now unblends from the part that is afraid, that is nervous, that is anxious. And you begin to heal when we begin to take distance. So separate but near. That's the word we'll use a lot. So you see that? It's not me, it's not the I, but a part in me. The moment we begin to recognize this, then we begin to heal because we're actually like treating the person. So here's something I need to say. A lot of us 80% of the time. If we don't have borderline personality disorders, things like bipolar, stuff like that, that are harder to cure, we can cure ourselves by prayer, by understanding ourselves, by talking to people, by listening to like seminars like this. Then you now have the tools. So in fact, we know that the body heals by itself, right? If you have a cut and you did not go to the doctor, then that cut will, if it's not severe enough, then the cut will heal as time goes. So we know that the Lord gives us this blessing, that it's part of our system. That's how God ordained things to be. If the body heals, then the soul should heal because the soul is more important. The soul, the psyche, the psychological stuff. But sometimes the psychological stuff is more profound, right, than just the bodily healing. So we need to give it attention because that's how we meet God, right, in our soul. Okay. Okay, so the development of the part model, a no fault part model. These parts just adapted, so it's not a fault of the part. They're just adapting in order to survive. But the effect of it is costly because there's now a lot of fragmentation in the self, right? I like to do this, but I also hate doing this. So I love you, but I also hate you, that kind of thing. There's now a fragmentation, a self alienation. That's why human integration is needed. And this is what happens. I mean, just in fact, with our experience as priests, it was only in 1998 or 96, I think, when John Paul II issued this encyclical on Pastores Dabo Vovis. So in English, I'll give you shepherds, the promise of the Father. And that's when human formation began to take root. Human formation began to evolve, began to be attended to. So that's why there's less sexual abuse by priests that were formed in the late 90s and the turn of the millennium. A lot of the priests who did abuse of boys were in the 60s, 70s, right? Because there was no human formation. They did not know what was going on in their soul, in their psyche. So human formation is, if it's given to priests, it's also given to lay people. We all have to have human formation. We all have to be integrated, not fragmented, right? So, when Jesus says, I give you peace, peace I give you, what does it really mean? There has to be harmony in the soul. That's what peace is, right? In terms of healing ministry. If there's no peace, then that's when we do all kinds of bad things because we're like fragmented. We're alienated from who we are as a person who is beloved by God. Okay? So it's needed. Human formation is needed. Okay. 7:40. We'll probably end at 8:30, but I will now introduce to you a lot of good things that you can bring home now and to begin to do the process of healing, as simple as that. And in fact, you're probably having healing already after 1 week. Some of you who have been like continuing this process, you'll be introduced to a lot of things, right? So we all have, in fact, we have a lot of material now to work on our healing. So more, what is a part? Just to understand this part thing. Okay, what is a part? A part is considered not just a passing emotional state. So you might think, oh, it just passes. It's an emotional state that tomorrow it's different. A part is considered not just a passing emotional state or customary thought pattern, but a distinct mental system with its own history, abilities, needs, and worldview. So I'm now reading from Bessel van der Kolk, from the book The Body Keeps the Score. Even the title is very suggestive of something. The body keeps the score, meaning whatever trauma we suffer. So, in a nutshell, it's registered in our system, in our body, in our minds, in our emotions. So, this is what we call implicit memory, to make it as simple as that, but it's more complex than that. But to make it simple, every event that we have experienced is registered in our system. So the body keeps the score. Remember that YouTube video I was asking you to watch? The still face experiment. Still face experiment. So there's a child that, the mother was like so it's an experiment. The mother was like doing coos and stuff, like all smiles, and just have this warmth towards the child. And the child was just so happy, smiling, making audible noises that meant happiness, right? And then the mother started being still face, poker face. And then the child you know, begins to feel uneasy, begins to looking different at different, what's going on, as if the child is trying to figure out what's going on with mom. All of a sudden he's still face, and he's trying to grab and all that, and pretty soon he started crying. You see, so because the child's brain is being formed, and all the stimuli, they understand what's going on, they perceive what if there's something wrong. So if the child is subjected to a lot of these stimuli that are not pleasant, then you develop all this weird stuff in the brain. It's recorded in the brain system. Right? So, okay. So I finished reading that, right? So trauma injects parts with beliefs and emotions that hijack them out of their naturally valuable state. For example, we all have parts that are childlike and fun. When we are abused, these are the parts that are hurt the most, and they become frozen, carrying the pain, terror, and betrayal of abuse. This burden makes them toxic, parts of ourselves that we need to deny at all costs. Okay? So the part is not just like a passing customary thought, but it's a distinct mental state. All right? So when I say state, it's already there. So, but healing comes and then it begins to change. Like what we're saying about the body keeps the score, it's recorded. You know how sometimes it's very hard to get out of this brain patterns because it's recorded there. As early as childhood, you begin to form your your brain based on what the stimulus is, or stimuli are, right? And we begin to develop that. So, I was reading this book about how children are supposed to be loud and noisy, correct? Children are like that. They want to be heard. They want to like run around. But if a parent is very subdued or rigid, like, how we say children are supposed to be seen, not heard. And they begin to say, stop being noisy. But it's not the nature of a child to be quiet, right? And if we don't allow that to happen, then we already like deformed or distorted the way of thinking of the child who's supposed to be noisy or vocal. Be quiet. So my dad was like a big disciplinarian. He doesn't like a lot of noise. So He might have inherited it from his parents. And so I began to notice this when my nephew, uh, I was having a meal with them. They took me to a restaurant, treat me out. And their children were there. They were still growing up. And we were in a nice restaurant. And the kids were pulling the curtains. It's like, I told my nephew, oh, why don't you tell him to stop? Oh, they're just kids. And they would damage the restaurant. They're pulling these curtains in the restaurant. But my thinking was like, my dad would not allow that, right? He won't allow such a thing. Oh, stop. You're being, naughty or something. So, in fact, when they started having grandchildren, like my nephew, they were always looking out for them. My parents were very protective, especially my dad. Always like watching. Oh, he might fall. Go get him. They don't want him. They don't want them to get hurt or anything. But you think it was too much, too protective. So we begin to have a child who's not adventurous, or not like inquisitive, if parents are too protective sometimes. Okay? So it's not to say, let me just say this. We all have faults and we all have flaws. And so let me put this in a Christian light, because it doesn't mean that we're forever wounded. In fact, because of our faith, it's because of our understanding, we begin to understand this and that we grow out of it. And this is the locus of our wounding, becomes the locus of our growth, our glorification. What is the word locus? The place, the soil, the milieu where we grew up in. And then we become better for it eventually, if we are able to integrate everything. We become compassionate, we become understanding. All these things, they come out of that. If we're not wounded at all, what do you think will happen? No, there's no such thing, because there's the cross. So, okay, it's something to think about so that we can integrate everything into our Christian life. All right. So I spoke about parts, and I always go back. So before I say that, any school of psychology recognizes parts. Okay, what are these parts? So sometimes it's called ego states. Okay, different states of the ego. Ego is just the Latin word for I. Archetypes. Some of you have read Carl Jung. Archetypes. Alters. So when there's dissociative identity disorders, alters, schizophrenia have alters. I am now this behaved person. And then like Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing. And the next time when the person is in anguish, then he or she might turn into somebody who's whatever, somebody who's not him. Remember Jekyll and Hyde? So one is behaved, the other is not behaved. Okay, alters. Complexes. We're familiar with this. Oh, you have an inferior complex. Oh, you have a superior complex. Yeah, like this complexes. That's what we use sometimes when we don't understand a lot of things. Schemas. So schema, that's another word. And now here we're using the word parts. Parts. Just it's more general. Okay? So when we have these parts, what do we need to do? So I already kind of alluded to this when we speak about the I. Speak about the parts rather than I am ashamed, rather than, or there's a part in me that is ashamed, rather than I am ashamed. So what we do, we begin to befriend our parts. No fault model. It's a red badge of courage. If you want to put this in a Christian way, these are the weeds that grow among the wheat for now. And what did the Lord say? Don't pull it. Because when you pull it, you might damage the wheat. So wait for the harvest. So that's one way of interpreting it. In fact, I noticed that I have young people who are my directees. And I also have older people that are my spiritual directees. And I noticed that in the young people, like say in their 20s, it's very hard for them to understand healing because there's not a lot of self awareness yet. So that means don't pull the weeds. Understand them. Understand what's going on because the moment you pull the weeds, it might harm them and the wheat together with the wheat, which is still young, right? So most of the time with young people, it's more coaching. Coaching. Oh, this is how you do it. It's more directive. With older people, there's a lot of prayer already, a lot of experience, a lot of you know, tragedies, a lot of triumphs, then they understand. And they also understand their patterns of being, right? So it's much easier to speak about healing. So I think you're getting it because now we've been through a lot. And now sometimes we're tired of this thing. I want to be healed of this thing. It keeps coming up, right? So, so we need to befriend our parts. All right. Speaking of which now, I want to share a very personal thing. So bring out your handout. Oh, it's befriending my 5 parts of procrastination. So how many of you procrastinate? You don't have to raise your hand. Oh, there's a lot. There's a lot there. How come not here? You were just shy. Okay. We're still ashamed when we procrastinate. So, you know what? I mean, I've been dealing this for decades, right? I began to understand, like in high school, or maybe not in high school, in college, I began to procrastinate because things are harder to do, right? So, and it took me a long time to heal. And of course, when you heal, there's still like lingering leftovers, if you will. And a lot of them, like I began to pray about it. In fact, I have a model in the parables or in the gospel passages that speaks about procrastination. So I know in October I will offer a spiritual exercises on healing with like different parts of the gospel that really talk about healing. So we can focus on healing. So for me, procrastination is the man at the pool in Bethesda. And he hasn't been healed and he's been there 38 years. Why? I think there's a procrastination going on. But you have to go dig deeply into the passage to see the procrastination. Okay, because there's a part there that makes the man procrastinate. Okay, I have so we won't go through this, but I'd like you to take this home to understand, and everyone is unique, correct? What's unique to me is different from yours. So you have to articulate it in a very personal, individual way. So that's what parts healing is. Okay. So for example, just to give you an understanding of my procrastination, I'd like to do things, but at the same time, there's a part in me that I don't want to. You see now the parts that are fighting. So, and when it's a big project, it's very daunting for me. I cannot start doing a big project. Okay. At the same time, my success driven, because I used to be very ambitious, I want to be successful, it's like attacking this part that doesn't want to do it. You see? So this, did you see this disintegration going on in me? It's very hard. I don't know if some of you who has this problem of procrastination, it's like very hard. It's like you're always like, what is going on? And then before you know it, you're depressed. And before you know it, you're attacking yourself. Right? So maybe just 2 things. So you see these 5 parts, the description of my parts in arriving at in really healing procrastination. So the first one is The overwhelmed, over-attacked, pressured part. Okay. If you go to, so this is not arranged in order. If you go to the fourth one, down below, the success-driven, fear of failure. Failure means staying in poverty, attacks overwhelmed and daunted parts. So the success-driven will always like, how come you're not doing it? How come you're not getting out of bed? Get up now. But the overwhelmed part is like, just like, almost like freeze mode. I don't want to do it. It's too much. It's too overwhelming for me. So in parts language, when we begin to talk to the parts, so the overwhelmed, over attack, pressured part, you begin to understand what are you feeling, because you have to ask that part. Feelings and characteristics of this part. So this overwhelmed part, I feel tortured by the success-driven part. Why are you torturing me? I don't want to do it. Okay? Exhausted, depressed, discouraged, does not want to move. Did you see this in Nelly? Well, she wants just to cover herself in a blanket and sleep until early afternoon. And the dishes don't get done, all these things because she's procrastinating. So there was a procrastination in her. So my feelings toward this part, okay, self-hatred. I don't want this part that doesn't move. Okay, how come you cannot move? Rebellion. So rebellion meaning you're a rebel to my success-driven part. How come you don't move? Rebellion. There's a rebellion. That's my feeling towards you. You see this letter B? That's before. That's how I thought about these parts. But when you begin to heal, you begin to befriend the part, you begin to talk to the part, the first thing I had was pity. And it moved into compassion. Then it moved into love. You see? So that's a after. So some of them are still ongoing. But I have recognized the before I start speaking to them and before I communicated with them to after. Okay, what is the narrative? Because there's a traumatic memory there, which I call the narrative, the past memory. Being pressured to work. So every Saturday, my mom wakes us up. It's time for general cleaning. So every Saturday, we do general cleaning in the house. So you probably know this. So we have these wooden oak floors, hardwood. And in between the floors are like very small grooves. And my mom doesn't want any dust on those, right? So we clean manually. I don't think, we didn't have a vacuum cleaner. We use brooms and stuff like that. But our house was very clean, immaculate, because we're doing general cleaning every Saturday. What else contributed to that? So I was talking to my friend who's now become really wealthy. They live in Fullerton. And one day we were talking about cleaning fish with a lot of sharp fins. If you grew up in the Philippines, my dad loves this fish. It's very small, but they're always alive. They've been fished out of the water, but they're alive for hours. They don't die. So when you're cleaning them, they have all these fins and they react. So you're cleaning them, taking the scale. So before you know it, you have a lot of cuts, very small cuts. They're very hard to clean and very hard to clean. So every time we're like seeing my dad or my mom come out of the tricycle. So the tricycle is a mode of transportation when they go to the market. They always want fresh fish, my parents. So we're like looking, and then that comes with this, oh, it's the fish again, the small fish that we dread. You see? But we have to do it. So it's time for you to do it, so we take turns. So it's like you don't want to do those things. That's how I developed this. It's hard, it's overwhelming. doing this general cleaning every Saturday. This work is very hard. It overwhelms. You see? So there's that. You see? So this memory has like affected me. This childhood events in life have affected me, and I get overwhelmed, over attacked, pressured. So the trauma-related response. Remember, we have this diagram. Sometimes you just submit to it. There's a flight thinking there. No, I don't want to do it. I take flight. And sometimes I freeze. I cannot move. Okay? So it's good to understand this, like to relate to what is going on. So in parts language and in parts healing, you have to have an image. Sometimes it's good to have an image. So my image for this overwhelmed, over attacked, pressured part is a beaten old lady with a cane. So she's walking and crossing the street, and perhaps she stops because she's now beaten and old. So after speaking with that lady, you begin to have pity, begin to have compassion, and begin to have love. So that's what's going on, my feelings toward this part. And then you begin to heal. I began to heal, right? Because I now love that part. I'm no longer like doing this to the part, attacking the part. Why was I attacking the part? Look at the second one. It's actually the most the culprit for this. The second one and the fourth one, the success driven and the hyperactive. So the hyperactive wants to do it urgently, no time to waste, attacks overwhelmed part. Okay? Feelings and characteristics of this part: high energy, wants to please and appease. Deep down, he is afraid of punishment. What if I did not clean the fish? Then there's punishment. I don't know if my dad will punish me, but there might be. But the punishment also is we don't have food to eat, right? So there's a punishment at the back of the mind of the child. If I don't clean the fish, then there's no food. There's just rice, but no fish. You cannot just eat rice, right? So the punishment is there. It's like almost like like subconscious, right? Right? But also that could punish me actively. So this hyperactive, to me, my feelings toward this part, exhausting, dismissive, just stop. Why are you like this? So that was before, right? But now it started with becoming tolerant of this hyperactivity. It's not that I'm not using a technical term, hyperactive, right? But I feel that there's something there about this ADD, HD, these things that we tolerant, understanding, compassion, love. There's always a movement when we begin to have this healing, a movement from unpleasant emotions, anger, hatred, dismissive, disgust, contempt. It has to move towards love. The moment there's love, there's healing. Because there's now an integration. It's love that integrates. It's love that heals. Right? So now, why was I like this? Hyperactive, wants to do it urgently. Because dad was tyrannical. I don't mean dad was a tyrant because I miss him all the time now. But there was a lot of honoring that happened in my healing. So dad was tyrannical and super urgent in asking errands or making commands. I felt that he wanted to be served, demanded prompt obedience. So that was my thinking before, right? And of course, this is a fighting response of the limbic system, of the autonomic response, fight. But at the same time, there's attachment. Remember the figure I gave you guys: submit, attachment, fight, flight, freeze, submit, attachment. Why there's attachment? I want to please dad. I want him to love me. I want him to praise me. I want him to say, oh, you're a good boy. Right? So there was attachment. You know my image here? Speedy Gonzales. You know Speedy Gonzales? So some of you were not, you're too young maybe. So it's actually a Mexican cultural icon. He's so fast, right? He's doing all these things. Arriba, andale, arriba, andale. Oh, I remember watching him on TV. And then, remember the Wacky Races? Have you heard the Wacky Races? It's also a cartoon, and they're all like always racing on cars and all that. And there was this guy, Dick Dastardly, and he would like cheat. He would create all kinds of obstacles for the others so he could win. But in the end, it backfires on him. So one day, I think I remember, he tied up all the cars in a pole. But the thing is, like I said, it would backfire on him, and he hit the pole, and the tie got broken, and they all spit out, and beat him. But he got hit by the pole. So that kind of thing, it's very funny actually. But there was this Dick Dastardly, there's a dishonesty in him that I thought there was a dishonesty in me as a child because sometimes I would do it so that I can have attachment. You see, you're crying for love, crying for attachment with dad. You see that? Okay. So you can review this if you like and begin to see what's going on here. So my question for you is this. My feelings toward this part, there's something that's underlying all this. And what is this underlying thingy that's going on? Why was I able to make this chart or be healed or talk to my part? Because now this is the thing. There is the self. Self. So SELF. And the self is always in us. Okay? It's like how God ordained us to be. The self is something that knows what's going on. But sometimes the self is, or most of the time, it's blended with the part. That's why we say, I am ashamed. I am angry. Rather than my part, there's a part in me that's angry. There's a part in me that's ashamed. So when we begin to unblend the self from the part, then we begin to heal. We begin to understand the part. You cannot love yourself if you say, I am bad, or I am shameful, or I am unlovable, or I am an angry person. But the moment you begin to separate the self or unblend the self from these parts, then you begin to talk to the part because the part has been hurt. That's the reason why that part is doing whatever it is doing that's unpleasant, because the part has adapted. Remember, so going back to what we're talking, the part just made adaptation. That's why it became this and that. Okay, you understand? So the self, a lot of our learnings in psychology, we can Christianize. So that's what I'm doing here because we're Catholics and Christians. So the self is, to me, God in me, the Holy Spirit in me, God in me who knows how to direct these parts. So the self is loved by God. The self is God in me who knows how to talk to these parts and integrate them. Okay? So when we begin to think that way, then we begin to understand, okay, this part needs to heal, and now the self is talking to this part so that this part will become part of me, no longer like hating me, so that kind of thing. So befriending one's parts is developing the practice of self-acceptance, one part at a time. When we withhold judgment of our parts, to be curious and interested rather than dismissing and reactive, We slow time. There is a relaxing of the sense of urgency to do or be anything different. We feel more at peace because our parts can be more at peace. Self alienation, that is, disowning of some parts and identifying with others exclusively, does not contribute to a sense of well being, even when it is absolutely necessary in order to survive. Self alienation creates tension, pits part against part. Remember what's going on with my overwhelmed and then hyperactive part? They pit against each other. Communicates a hostile environment, often much like the traumatic environment, and diminishes the self-esteem of every part. Befriending means that we radically accept that we share our bodies and lives with these roommates. They are roommates. And that living well with ourselves requires living amicably and collaboratively with our parts. The more we welcome rather than reject them, the safer our internal worlds. Okay, there's something here that we need to understand. It says over identification, identifying with one or two parts exclusively. What does that mean? When we identify with a part or two parts exclusively, we're really focusing on those two parts. And that's when we begin to be maybe like one dimensional person. It could be a person who's all about, oh, look at those Eucharistic ministers. They're now, they don't approach the altar right away, or they're not, you see, we might be focusing on something that's rule-based, and all we see is rules, right? So there's a part in me that's so interested in rules. Sometimes we call them liturgical Nazis. Have you heard of that? There are times like that. They're always correcting the priest or correcting Eucharistic ministers. In fact, there are priests also that are liturgical Nazis. So forgive me for saying that, but it's reality sometimes. All they see is rules on the altar. Okay? So that's over-identification with the part. So a person who has that might start, if you unblend from the part, how come you're saying that always? How come? Because there's always tension. If the person is always looking at rules, right, on the liturgy, you think the person is at peace? Probably not. He's always in anguish. Like, oh, that person is not following rules. And then he goes to bed, it's like, I can't believe it. I have to correct all the Catholic Church when it comes to liturgy. You see? Of course, he's in anguish. And the only way he can heal from that, if the person is now, okay, what's going on here? To begin to separate the self from that part that's exclusively dwelling on rules. Did you notice that? We have that. We have our own orientation and emphasis. So, okay. So, over identification, it becomes, this is, sometimes we think about personalities. Oh, because that's, why? Because that's his personality. Let it be. But in fact, it's not. There's healing that needs to happen in that person. Okay? Oh, that's his nature. That's just his personality. But personalities can be modified when we are healed, right? We think that, oh, that's okay. I like to do this and that. Oh, that's my personality. No, it's not really like, well, we see personalities, of course. But if personalities have imperfections, right? So if there are imperfections, that means it needs to be healed. It needs to be worked on. Okay. So befriending, healing of procrastination. You can use that as your reference. Learn from it. Okay. I will now introduce the self. We'll end up in 14 minutes, and then I'll give you a homework. Okay. Bring out your Bring out your other sheet there, the self. So I forgot to put the citation here. Some of you have this book already. Okay? Self-therapy workbook. An exercise book for the IFS process by Bonnie Weiss. So I'm trying to Christianize everything, so I'm not using IFS. What it is internal family system. So in a person, there's an internal family. So, and a family has many members, right? So that is not, it's not important to know all these things, but if you like, that's what we're using. The parts model is from an internal family systems. So look at this, the self. Let's read it together. The self is connected. When you are in self, oh, yeah, you can read it silently, but together. Then when you are in self, you naturally feel close to other people and want to relate in harmonious, supportive ways. You are drawn to make contact with them and to be in community. The self also wants to be connected to your parts. When you are in self, you are interested in having a relationship with each of your parts, which helps them trust you and opens the way to healing. All right, so connection. I need to be connected. All right. But that doesn't mean I need to be blended. Okay, so we'll talk more about that. I've been alluding to that. The self is curious. Did you see this? This is God in me. You know, to just talk about the Christian element of this. When we are godly, then I feel close to people. I don't judge them, right? I just want to be with them. I respect them. Whatever faults they have, I respect, I honor, I have compassion. So the self is curious, the second one. When you are in self, you are curious about other people in an open, accepting way, rather than I'm trying to fix you, right? When you inquire into what makes them tick, it's because you want to understand them, not judge them. The self is also curious about the inner workings of your mind. You want to understand why each part acts as it does, what's, what its positive intent is for you, and what it is trying to protect you from. Okay, remember the part has adapted. So they're just doing what is best for the self, for the person. They don't want to harm the person. But since they're just parts, they don't know the overall workings, right? So they could harm you, although their intention is very good. Why? Because they want you to survive. They adapted. This curiosity comes from an accepting place, not a critical one. When parts sense this genuine interest, they know they are entering a welcoming environment and they aren't afraid to reveal themselves to you. So the moment they start revealing to you, it took me a long time to do this, befriending my 5 parts of procrastination. So they began to reveal themselves to me sometimes. And here's the thing, before I continue, you know, we're using psychology. So I said theology, philosophy, psychology. But right now we're focusing on psychology because we cannot heal without these tools because we're wounded. You know, things, the environment, the world we live in is imperfect. Where does God come in? So God comes in some of these concepts, but also in the very process. So it's like, here's an analogy. So I go to the doctor because I need surgery. All right? So the doctor is needed for me to have surgery. Say I have a bypass, triple heart bypass. So where does God come in? This is the trust now. This is prayer. Lord, I pray that the doctor will be attentive when he does surgery. Lord, I pray that I heal. Lord, I pray. So it's very Christian, right? That's why, of course, the Lord gives us doctors, dentists, teachers, evangelists, preachers. It's all the body of, right? What St. Paul says, we are all parts of the body, members of the body. Each one has its purpose. So it's very Christian, in fact, but we're using a psychological tool. Just like we still go to the doctor to have triple bypass surgery. You cannot pray it away if your heart has a lot of cholesterol or the arteries are blocked. Correct? Okay, sometimes you can pray it, but we don't know if the Lord will give us a miracle. So we have to use our human reasoning. So I need to go to the doctor. I need to take whatever it is, medicine that he gives. Okay? Just like I cannot pray away a toothache if there's cavity. So, but when the doctor is doing that, the dentist is doing that, I'm trusting God in every way possible. Because He's the one who heals through the hands of the doctors, through the hands of a psychologist or a spiritual director. Okay? All right, so going back to the self is curious. This curiosity comes from an accepting place, not a critical one. When parts sense this genuine interest, they know they are entering a welcoming environment and they aren't afraid to reveal themselves to you. So the parts now are not alienated but are being integrated into the whole person, right? The self is compassionate. All right? So this is God in me. God is always merciful, compassionate, wants to love the part that is alienated. Compassion is a form of kindness and love that arises when people are in pain. You genuinely care about how others feel and often feel prompted to support them through difficult times. When you are in self, you also naturally feel compassion for yourself. Right? Okay, I understand now while I'm like this. Like my dad was so strict, whatever, so now I begin to have compassion in me. When parts are extreme, they are reacting to pain. Compassion toward yourself is the most essential ingredient in the inner quest for understanding. It is needed in order to hold, support, and nurture your parts while you explore your system. Your parts can sense the self's compassion. It makes them feel safe and cared for, so they want to open up and share themselves with you. In fact, when the part are acting out because there's no one that's caring for them. You see that? You know why kids sometimes act out? They want attention and love. What are child's tantrums? The most simple explanation, they're like crying out for attention. While either like crying and like, doing tantrums. They're crying out for attention. Right? So, the hardest one. There's a psychological uh, interpretation of why the hardened criminals want to be caught, but they do. Like let's say a serial killer, and of course, why do they want to be caught? They are tired of killing people or doing bad things because they want attention, and the most hardened criminals are the ones who've never been touched. They've been neglected all throughout life. No one has touched them and give them affection. So there was an interview of some of the hardened criminals, and that's what they're saying. So they want to be caught. In fact, I want to be caught because I want attention. I'm tired of killing people or whatever they're doing. Okay. Okay. The self is calm, centered, and grounded. This is especially helpful when you are relating to a part that has intense emotions. Intense grief or shame, for example, can be overwhelming if you aren't grounded in self. But when you are centered in the calmness of self, there is no need to avoid a part that is feeling intense emotion. You remain in self while the part shows you its pain. The calmness of self supports you through the difficult work of witnessing and healing the part. Analogy. Did you notice that? So when my mom was very ill, Alzheimer's, and once in a while we have to rush her to the hospital, you notice that when you speak to the doctors, they're so calm. But some of us are so are so tense because you love mom. You don't want mom to die. You want the doctor to take care of her. And you know what the doctor says sometimes? Like, okay, uh, just sit down here and we'll attend to your mom. Because like all this reaction, emotion does not help. And the doctor has to be really calm in order to provide medicine, to prescribe medicine. You know that, right? But you wonder, why is this doctor so calm? As if he's not reacting to, we're like almost like in a, in a very in a situation where, we're so anxious. It's a life and death situation. But the doctor is so calm. That's why we heal. That's how they heal. No? So that's how we heal ourselves too. When we are calm, centered, and grounded, then we are understanding the emotions. We are understanding the part, rather than when we are emotional, we cannot really think. Remember, our prefrontal cortex is not working. We're like on the limbic system. So this fight or flight when there's a lot of emotion. Okay, I want to end with this, which is a homework for you, and to begin to like see these things. So it's in your handout, 5 steps to unblending. So I'm trying to bring out these things now to like understand the self. The self cannot act if we're so blended, meaning we're not grounded, we're not calm, we're emotional. The moment we're emotional, that means we're blended with a part. So the self has to be separate but near. Okay, remember what I said, the part wants to be attended to. The part wants to be comforted. The part wants to be loved. But if the self is blended with the part, no one could do that to the part. So the self has to be separate but near. I'm attending to you, don't worry. So this is what we say sometimes. The analogy is like he's the conductor of an orchestra and there's so many members, right? So here's something. So just go to number 1. You can read the rest later. What I want for you to do as a homework, think about in the last 2-3 days, something that happened to you that's unpleasant. Okay? So then attend to that part. There's something there. So for example, like I had I felt so terrible when one of my, let's say, I'm making up, I can't remember a story, but okay, I felt so terrible when one of my brothers, I asked him to say Mass for me, for example. And then he promised me, yes, I will say Mass for you. Or we switch Masses, for example. So I'm making up a story, it's not true. And then he did not show up. So I ended up doing 2 Masses. So of course I will feel terrible. I will smile if I was, if I wasn't healed, or of course I'm still healing. It's like, what's happening there? Why did you not show up? I wonder if, these kinds of things, and I begin to ruminate. So whatever I was feeling there is probably a part that I need to address. So this is initial steps in unblending. So go to number 1. First, assume that any and all upsetting or overwhelming feelings and thoughts are a communication from parts. And try to make that assumption even if you are not sure it is true. So, Father Dave, I'm making up an example, okay? Father Dave did not show up for Mass when in fact we switched with each other. So I felt upset by that. Number 2, describe the feelings and thoughts as their. By the way, Father Dave is very giving. The moment you ask him to do things, he'll do it for you. Okay? That's why Dave, don't volunteer. You already did a lot of things. So, okay, number 2, describe the feelings and thoughts as their reaction. So, like, for example, I'm beginning to hate this priest who did not show up. So, the feelings and thoughts as their reaction. So, these feelings and thoughts, I'm now like, this is the part. They are upset. They are having a hard time. They are overwhelmed. See what happens when you speak for the parts by talking about their feelings. Oh, so now you're detaching the self there. You're now seeing, oh, you're feeling really upset. You're feeling like, what is going on? You're feeling this to this person. You're feeling betrayed. You're feeling left out. So now you're speaking for the part. Did you see? There's now a kind of a distancing by the self. The moment you recognize the feelings of the parts, the thoughts. Okay, you go to number 3. Create a little more separation from them. Separation because you're unblending. Just enough so you can feel their feelings less intensely and you can feel yourself too. Did you notice that? You begin to feel their feelings, but you're also feeling yourself. Change your position, lengthen your spine, engage your core, or sit back. Keep repeating, they are feeling. So, if I were you, I would just use one. He or she, this part is feeling. So, but they are feeling, meaning the parts. This part is feeling left out. This part is feeling betrayed. This part is feeling whatever. But now you're beginning to see the feeling. So the part is now being recognized, and the part actually wants to be recognized, like I said. They don't have the capacity to do it on their own. It has to be the self that directs them, that helps them. And they want to be that. They want the self to direct them. Number 4, use your wise, grown up mind, the part of you that is a compassionate friend or organized professional, to have a reassuring conversation with whomever is upset. Acknowledge that the part or parts are afraid, overwhelmed, ashamed, or sad. So now you're recognizing, you're acknowledging what they're feeling. So, oh, there's now a person that's really cares for me, that really cares for me, that is interested in what I'm doing. You see what happened in the past. If we're not doing this, we've been just letting this part do whatever he or she wills, right? And then, so left unattended, in our orchestra, if they're not following the conductor, then of course, they want harmony with the other instruments, musical instruments. If you're playing the bassoon and no one is leading you, you're like destroying the rhythm of the whole orchestra, the whole symphony. Acknowledge that the part or parts are afraid, overwhelmed, ashamed, or sad. Imagine if this were the fears of your colleagues, clients, or friends, how would you respond? What would you do? What would you tell them? Ask them what they need from you to be a little less afraid. Don't we do that? In fact, in life, we do it all the time. Oh, what's going on with you? What can I do to help you? You see? All right. 5, get their feedback and opinions. Is what you are doing helping even a little? What do they need right in this moment to feel a little less alone, a little less afraid, a little less angry? Do they like it when you listen and show concern? Promise them that you will check in with them. Make more of an effort to remember they are in distress or be more protective. Okay, if you start doing this and you keep doing it all the time, then you begin to see a change. You begin to see like a change in the way you think, in the way the parts behave, and before you know it, the parts just give in or no longer act out, right? So this is simple. Everyone can do this healing for you, for us. So Keep doing this, and so later on, we will get into more detailed way of looking at how we heal the parts. So now the Q&A for the last 8 minutes. We usually end at 8:45. Questions? Yes. Oh, you're missing two. Uh, there's no more there. We'll give you. Okay, I'll give you. In fact, mine. Okay. What else? Questions? Yes.
When you're saying separate yourself, like putting yourself away from yourself,
Okay.
like looking at the third person.
Correct. So we haven't really talked about a way of like getting into it, but there is uh, being. You really don't like pull yourself as if it's automatic. You begin to be mindful. What do I mean by mindful? Being present to the part that experiencing an unpleasant emotion. So it actually happens naturally, but you have to train yourself. So you might actually say to the part, "Can you sit back a bit so I can understand what's going on in you?" It's a matter of communicating and negotiating. You see what I mean? So a part that's upset. But the thing is, if we're blended with the part, I'm the one that's upset, not the part. But we begin to see it's just a part of me that's upset right now. So you begin to talk to the part. In fact, so the self is really becoming a conductor here, becoming the God, the person, God in you that's like directing the part. Can you sit back for a little bit? Can we have a separation for a little bit, however language you want to say? I just want to understand you. I want to know you. In fact, I want to love you. So then when I begin to understand you, then, there's a lot of healing there. So does that answer your question? How you will separate ourselves from the part?
It's very hard is because you're feeling it, and then yet at the same time you're trying to detach yourself.
Correct. Because at first it's difficult because you're feeling it. But remember now, we're talking about it's just a part of me. So begin to understand that language. It's not I who's angry. The moment we have all these eyes, so that's why I talk about the I language versus the part language. So we'll do more of this maybe. In fact, I will do some workshop in our next meeting so you can understand what we're doing. Just try it. So use these 5 steps or 4 steps and try to just follow it. What are you feeling? So, but with the intention that you're talking to a part in you. Correct? And before you know it, you're like doing it. It becomes automatic in us. Whereas before, if we don't have that knowledge, we're so blended. So most of the time, we're actually blended when we have unpleasant experiences. This is the fragmentation of the self that we're talking about, right? So when I'm upset, okay, then I begin to think, why am I upset? What is the part in me that's upset? Then you begin to talk to that part. It takes training, but the moment you get this, it becomes, like I said, automatic. You do it every day. In your prayer, you do it every day. And then there's a lot of healing that happens. All right? Yes.
So I'm just thinking that maybe for me at least, it may help if I imagine what I'm going through is actually a friend going through it.
Say again? What you're going through is a friend?
If I imagine that it's actually, I can picture a friend going through it instead of me, what I'm going through, and then how I react to them. Would that be helpful or kind of
It might not work. It might not work with a friend because you don't know what's go.
no,
It,
I'm imagining that it's a friend that's having
it's
what
better.
would be if I see that I was with them and then
Okay, and we'll talk more about this. But did you see the sheet? My 5 parts in procrastination. It's okay. You can have that. Oh, you have now? Rather than making it a friend of yours, create an image of who that person is in you. And then, in fact, you will revisit that image. Remember this beaten old lady with a cane? So I used to like pressure myself. How come you're not moving? But now, a beaten old lady with a cane, you cannot like torture the beaten old lady with a cane. You want to love the person. In fact, I remember like having this imagery and I'm assisting her cross the street. Right? And now she's moving. She's moving and she's like, oh, okay, she just needs help. So you can have imagery.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of picturing, where you're seeing somebody else.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, you can see somebody else like an image, but it is about you, a part in you that has that.
Maybe it's like a friend. So I can-
Yeah, you can. You can. Okay, that's probably okay. But there's something about the friend. It's because there's an acceptance that needs to happen. Remember befriending. I spoke about befriending the part. So it has to be really you. But the part in you, just has an image that you use. So if you use a friend as if it's detached from you. So I don't know. We'll talk more. You can ask that question because maybe you're thinking about the same thing as I am. Okay, anything else?
Well, I'm just wondering that if you have 5 parts for one trait, I'm just wondering how many parts does one person have for all their traits?
Many. Many. So after a while, you begin to like integrate them. There are like subparts. I mean, just in procrastination, I identified 5 parts. So, but don't worry. I don't want you to worry too much. But after a while, of course, you probably like want to like look into these big parts. And then after a while, like they begin to heal. So one at a time, one part at a time. And then you start like maybe like addressing the ones that give you the most struggle. Right? So, yeah, don't be alarmed because like the self is like doing this, integrating things. Right? So, rather than not listening to them and then just ignore it because there's just too many parts. And so after a while, you will actually develop a kind of a diagram of how they relate to each other. And then you begin to become whole. Healing the whole person, you become integrated. Okay, one last question.
Father, what was the other book besides Fisher?
Ah,
There was another book.
there's a lot more, but these are the things I use. The Body Keeps the Score. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Okay? Self-Therapy by Bonnie Weiss. The one by Janina Fisher. It depends on the seminar I'm giving. But remember, like, if we focus on the spiritual aspect of healing, we're talking about Be Healed, JP2 Center, and there's also a lot of books there that I can recommend. Okay? All right. Let's just close with a prayer, and I'll give you a blessing. So do that, and come back next time with some questions, in fact, from the 4 steps of unblending. Okay. Glory be to the Father and